A team of students from one of the world's most prestigious universities, MIT, is about to rewrite the rules of gambling. With a groundbreaking strategy, they'll transform games of pure chance into calculated outcomes that work entirely in their favor. They'll hit the casinos and gambling halls right in their own territory, raking in millions, all without breaking a single law. So, what exactly was their genius strategy? And how did they manage to outsmart the casinos for years without anyone ever noticing? Keep watching until the end and enjoy. Our story begins in 1992 at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, one of the most powerful universities globally. This institution has remained a consistent fixture in the top 5 universities worldwide, often ranking first. Naturally, the students who study at this university are the elite. MIT only accepts the brightest minds, and it was from this institution that a team of students emerged, ready to take on the casinos in their own game. But the mastermind behind this team wasn't a student, it was a professor. A man whose full name was never fully disclosed, known simply as Mr. M. A computer science professor at MIT, Mr. M was a genius in both technology and mathematics, and he would be the leader and architect behind this entire operation. He had a particular passion for a casino game called Blackjack, one of the most famous games in the world of gambling. At first glance, Blackjack may appear to be a game of pure luck. But if you have a solid grasp of mathematics, you quickly realize that you can tilt the odds in your favor using a technique known as card counting. What sets blackjack apart is that the more cards are dealt in each round, the more you can calculate the remaining cards left in the deck. By keeping track of these remaining cards, you can mathematically increase your chances of winning. This technique, card counting, isn't illegal, and nobody can accuse you of cheating if you do it, because it's simply a matter of doing math in your head. However, casinos have their own way of dealing with card counters. Their monitors and security personnel keep a close eye on the games and the players. If they spot anyone using card counting, that person is immediately thrown out of the casino. You might wonder, how can they possibly notice this when it's just math going on inside someone's head? I'll explain that in more detail later when we dive into the specifics of the game. But for now, let's get back to Mr. M wasn't the one who invented card counting in blackjack. Others had used this technique before him, and one mathematician even wrote an entire book about it. However, what Mr. M did differently was adding his own special twist and executing it better than anyone ever had. This time, he wasn't alone. He was doing it with a team composed entirely of math prodigies. Mr. M's fascination with blackjack and card counting drove him to spend years refining the technique from start to finish. And in 1992, when the gambling industry in America was thriving and new casinos were springing up everywhere, especially in the gambling mecca of Las Vegas, Mr. M knew it was the perfect time to launch his team. He personally trained the team members, ensuring they were prepared and battle-tested. What fueled his motivation even more was the opening of a new casino close to the university, an ideal training ground before taking on the high-stakes world of Las Vegas. But before all of this, they needed people to build the team, management and capital. You can't make money in gambling without having some money to start with. They estimated they'd need at least $500,000 to make the effort worthwhile. So, they turned to investors. Mr. M sat down with 2 of his close associates to discuss the idea. They decided to establish a legitimate company, complete with management, accountants, and even paying taxes. They wanted everything above board, as what they were doing wasn't technically illegal. By forming a legal entity, they could protect everyone's rights, including the players. It would also make it easier to attract investors if everything was clear and organized. They officially registered the company, naming it Strategic Investments. The founding partners listed on the official documents were Mr. M and his associates, Bill and John, the managers. The company's stated goal was to apply mathematical analysis to profit from blackjack, making it a legitimate business with clearly defined objectives. As mentioned earlier, this strategy wasn't illegal, and the stellar reputations of the three founders in the scientific community and their network of friends and colleagues quickly attracted investments. They raised the required capital, over $500,000, in no time. Of course, any profits would need to be distributed fairly among management, investors, and the players, as per the company's official documents. The profit shares were divided as follows: 45% to management, 45% to investors, and 10% to the players. Now, some might consider these percentages a bit unfair, especially since the players were the ones out there on the front lines. But in addition to their 10% profit share, the players would also receive salaries. Their goal was to recruit students as players, specifically students with strong mathematical skills. Naturally, all MIT students are brilliant at math, but they also needed individuals who were fearless and could maintain focus despite the chaos and distractions of a casino. Casinos are noisy, chaotic places filled with distractions, and the pressure of the game can break concentration. But these students would need to keep their minds razor sharp, running calculations amidst all the commotion. The plan was to put out a general call to the students, recruit a large number, and then filter through to select the best of the best. The word spread through flyers posted around the university, and soon enough the students themselves were buzzing about it. Some of these students already knew about card counting, or at least had heard of it. When they saw the announcement or heard the news, they were intrigued, and some were enticed by the opportunity to make money. After all, these students had no steady income, and any chance to earn, especially doing something that allowed them to use their brains and talents, was tempting. Around 40 students showed up to the first meeting led by Mr. M in one of the classrooms. Mr. M began explaining the concept and the principles they would be working with. He made it clear that this would require time and months of training to reach a high level of mastery. He warned them that it wouldn't be easy and that many would likely drop out along the way. He emphasized that anyone not fully committed would be dismissed immediately. This wasn't a game. There was a $500,000 investment at stake. He explained that everything would be done legally, with a registered company, official paperwork, accounting, and detailed planning. Most of the students were already familiar with blackjack and the idea of card counting, so explaining the process wasn't difficult, especially since they were all mathematical prodigies. Now, to follow the story, you need to understand how to play this game. Here's a simple explanation. In blackjack, there's a dealer and players. The dealer deals cards to each player and to themselves, and the players compete against the dealer, not against each other. The goal is to have cards with a total value higher than the dealer's, without exceeding 21. For example, if your cards total 20 and the dealer's total 17, you win and double your bet. However, if either you or the dealer's total exceeds 21, that person immediately loses. The same goes for the other players at the table. Anyone who has a higher total than the dealer, but stays under 21, wins double their bet. And, naturally, the more money you bet, the higher the potential winnings, or losses. In this game, the players are up against the casino itself, because the dealer is a direct representative of the house. When the dealer loses, they pay out the player using the casino's money. This game can continue for several rounds, with the dealer dealing more cards to the players and themselves each time. As the game progresses and more rounds are played, fewer cards remain in the deck. This is where card counting comes into play. If, as a player, you can keep track of the categories and values of the cards that have already been dealt, you'll know what remains in the dealer's deck. With quick mathematical calculations, you can predict whether the upcoming rounds will favor you. To put it simply, if your calculations show that most of the remaining cards in the dealer's deck are high-value cards, you bet more money. If most of the remaining cards are low value, you bet less. That's the basic principle. For example, if your calculations indicate that there are many high-value cards left in the deck, you can predict that the dealer might draw a high card, pushing their total over 21, which means they'd lose automatically, and you win. Of course, card counting doesn't guarantee you'll win every hand, but it shifts the odds significantly in your favor. You might lose a few rounds, but since the probabilities are in your favor, you should end up with a profit overall by the end of a week or month, after playing a large number of games. This game differs from other gambling games because each round builds on the previous one. The more cards drawn from the deck, the better you can predict the upcoming rounds, as you can estimate the remaining cards with mathematical precision. By doing so, you tilt the odds in your favor rather than relying solely on blind luck. This is a simplified explanation of the game and the card counting technique. The actual subject is far more complex, with many additional rules, but this gives you a basic understanding to follow the story. Those wanting to dive deeper can research it on their own. The key point is that Mr. M explained the card counting method to his students in meticulous detail. As I mentioned, some of them had heard of the technique or knew a bit about it, but none had Mr. M's deep knowledge. He began teaching them all the formulas and tables they'd need to memorize and apply while using the technique. It was like taking an additional university course, complete with formulas, tables, and numbers. And this was just the theoretical part. They also needed to master the practical side, training themselves to count cards and perform these calculations automatically without even thinking, especially under the distractions and pressures of a casino. Reaching this level took months of intense training, which is exactly what Mr. M had planned. He put them through grueling practice sessions every day, training them for 6 months straight. After that, they'd have to pass a practical exam, a very tough one. Mr. M treated it as if it were one of the hardest courses at the university, which led about half the students to drop out. They simply couldn't handle the pressure, especially with their regular academic workload to juggle. Some students, however, were eager from the start. Their enthusiasm helped them excel and learn quickly. But mastering the card-counting technique wasn't the hardest part of the operation. The real challenge was working together as a team, which was crucial for outsmarting casino security. Even though what they were doing wasn't illegal, and casinos couldn't accuse them of cheating, security guards monitoring the games could eject and ban anyone they suspected of using card counting. Dealing with casino security was the most difficult part of the entire strategy. Back in the early days, casinos and gambling halls were often run by the mafia or organized crime groups. If they caught anyone trying to cheat or bend the rules, they didn't just throw them out. They made an example out of them with a brutal beating, to deter others. But over time, these casinos turned into legitimate businesses, operating under state laws like any other business. While they could no longer physically harm patrons, they maintained a strong security presence. Security personnel were everywhere, monitoring every game and every table with surveillance cameras. If they suspected someone was up to something suspicious, they could track their every move and blacklist them, banning them from entering the casino forever. They kept detailed databases of everyone who entered, complete with photos, descriptions, and names. But how could casino security detect people using the card counting method? After all, card counting is just mathematical calculations happening inside a person's head. There's no tool, no visible cheat. How could they catch someone? First, anyone gambling large amounts of money would attract security's attention, especially if they started winning. As a card counter, you should start by placing small bets in the early rounds. As the game progresses and more cards are dealt, your calculations will show whether the remaining cards are favorable. If they are, you increase your bet to win more money. If they aren't, you decrease your bet. This constant fluctuation in bets is what draws attention. If you start placing big bets and winning consistently, casino security and surveillance will definitely notice. Mr. M knew from the beginning that he'd need a strategy to outsmart casino security and their spotters. His solution was simple yet brilliant: teamwork. The idea was that most of the team members would act as spotters. A spotter's job was to go to a specific table and play like any ordinary gambler, placing small bets of $10 or $20. Throughout the game, the spotter would count the cards, playing for several rounds. When their calculations indicated that it was time to raise the stakes, the spotter would signal a teammate nearby. This teammate, known as the big player or gorilla, was the one holding the money. The big player would then join the table and place a large bet. In blackjack, it's normal for someone to join a game already in progress, since players are competing against the dealer, not each other. The big player would step in at just the right moment, placing a high bet, because the spotter had determined it was the optimal time. Casino security wouldn't suspect a thing because the spotter's bets were small and consistent, while the big player's high-stakes bets looked perfectly normal. To the casino, it seemed like the big player was simply a high roller. This made it much harder for casino security to detect that card counting was being used. Therefore, the student's task was more complex than simply learning how to count cards. They had to work seamlessly as a team. Mr. M drilled teamwork into them, teaching them how to execute their strategy flawlessly amidst the pressure, noise, and constant security surveillance of a casino. Imagine the casino environment. You're playing among other gamblers, surrounded by noise, music, and constant chatter. Slot machines are ringing, people are talking, and players at neighboring tables might strike up a conversation with you at any moment. Surveillance cameras are fixed overhead, and security guards are everywhere. In the midst of all this chaos, you must keep your mind sharp, stay focused, count the cards, and perform precise mathematical calculations without making any errors, because even a small mistake could cost you big money. On top of that, you have to watch for signals from your teammates, or give signals yourself if you're the spotter. That's why Mr. M subjected the students to intense training and rigorous tests that only the elite could pass. Before these tests, he taught them all the details, from complex calculations to coordination under stress. After 6 months of grueling preparation, it was time for the practical exams. Mr. M created a chaotic environment filled with noise and distractions to simulate a real casino atmosphere and push them to work under even more intense conditions. In these simulated environments, he tested the students by dealing cards rapidly, while the one being tested had to count them accurately, ignoring the noise and confusion. If the student managed to count the cards correctly under these conditions, they passed the test. But passing once wasn't enough. They had to succeed multiple times consecutively. There was no room for error. Passing one time and failing the next meant they weren't ready. Mr. M was relentless in creating distractions and challenges for them. He would even go as far as throwing ice water on them to simulate extreme conditions. Naturally, almost none of the students succeeded on their first attempt. Several gave up out of sheer frustration. Mr. M's tests were, quite literally, harder than their actual university exams. However, some students thrived in these conditions and adapted quickly. Among them were 3 notable students, Sean, Dan, and Katie. These 3 would play significant roles in the story, so remember their names. But they weren't the only ones to pass Mr. M's tests. In total, about 12 students managed to qualify for the team. Interestingly, Sean was the only one to pass Mr. M's tests on his first attempt, making him arguably the best among them. He was already proficient in card counting, having researched and practiced it before training under Mr. M. With the team selected, Mr. M decided it was time for their first practical experience. They chose a nearby casino called Foxwoods for their trial run. Given that it was their first real attempt, they wouldn't gamble large amounts, just a minimum of $5 per round. During their first trial, the results varied from student to student. Some made impressive profits, while others faced losses. These losses weren't due to incorrect play, but as I mentioned, card counting doesn't guarantee a win every time. It merely tilts the odds in your favor. You might lose a few rounds, or even days or months, but mathematically over the long run, you should come out ahead. This is known as the law of large numbers. On that first day, although some students ended up losing, the team as a whole made a respectable profit. They repeated these practical exercises at the same casino several times. Once Mr. M felt the team was ready, he decided it was time to target the big fish, the casinos of Las Vegas. Armed with the $500,000 they had raised from investors, they set out for Las Vegas in September 1992. Sean, being one of the best students, earned Mr. M's trust and was entrusted with a significant sum of money, approximately $150,000. Sean would be the gorilla, the player who placed the big bets. He had to keep this money on him at all times, literally hiding it in his jacket, rather than placing it in a bag that could be snatched or left behind. Sean's trip to Vegas was delayed compared to the rest of the team because gathering the cash took longer than expected. The other students had already booked their tickets and arrived in Vegas ahead of him. Mr. M constantly reminded Sean of the essentials: no alcohol, stay focused, and don't let anything distract you. He warned him that Vegas was a city of glitter designed to dazzle and distract people. But Sean had to stay focused on his goal. When Sean finally boarded the next available flight to Las Vegas, he was struck by the city's bright lights and bustling energy. It felt like stepping into a different world, which only heightened his excitement for the adventure ahead. The team's first target was the Mirage Hotel Casino, one of the most famous in Vegas. They planned to meet near the hotel's iconic volcano. However, when Sean arrived at the designated spot, he couldn't find anyone from the team. He searched for a while, but to no avail. Back then, mobile phones weren't widespread, so he had no way to contact them. After an hour of searching, he decided to enter the casino alone. After wandering around for a bit, he spotted Katie inside. She was also alone and explained that the team had split up to explore the casino while waiting for him. But Sean was the gorilla, the one with the money, so none of them could gamble without him. With only him and Katie left, they needed a plan to work together. They decided to adopt personas, one of Mr. M's strategies. Sean would pretend to be a Russian arms dealer, complete with a Russian accent, which was easy since he had Russian origins. Katie would play the role of his American wife. Adopting these personas helped them blend in. A Russian arms dealer naturally fits the profile of someone who would gamble large sums of money. Sean and Katie approached one of the blackjack tables. Sean took out $10,000 and handed it to the dealer. The dealer exchanged it for casino chips to start playing. In the first few rounds, Sean placed small bets, allowing the game to progress so he could start assessing the cards and see where the odds were heading. Initially, the numbers weren't in their favor. High-value cards had already been dealt, leaving mostly smaller cards in the deck. As I explained earlier, when this happens, the odds aren't in the player's favor. They kept counting the cards round after round, waiting for the mathematical odds to shift in their favor. When the odds weren't favorable, it was best for the gorilla or big money player to step away and let the spotter continue playing. Sean, playing the high roller, stood up and announced that he was going to the restroom. Katie, acting as his wife, took his place at the table and started placing small bets, just $25 each round, while continuing to count the cards and calculate the odds as Mr. M had taught them. From a distance, Sean kept watch. When the odds finally shifted in their favor, Katie was supposed to signal Sean to return. They had prearranged signals. Touching her face with her left hand meant good odds, the right hand meant excellent odds, and using both hands meant the odds were overwhelmingly in their favor. Immediately, these signals were simple, yet incredibly clever, easily overlooked by anyone not in the know. As soon as Sean saw Katie's signal, he returned to the table and placed all his chips on the round, as the odds were overwhelmingly in their favor. They won round after round, tripling their money. The initial $10,000 had turned into $30,000. Naturally, when a player starts winning such large sums, they attract the attention of security monitors and casino managers. One of these monitors quickly approached Sean and Katie at the table, striking up a conversation. Initially, Sean felt they might get kicked out, but to his surprise, the manager asked if they were staying at the hotel. When Sean replied that they hadn't booked a room yet, the manager continued, "You're a big winner with us, and we like to treat our high rollers well. I'd like to offer you a suite at the hotel." Sean was initially shocked by the offer, but quickly accepted it. Casinos often extend such offers, not out of generosity, but in the hope that the winner will stay longer and continue gambling, increasing the likelihood of losing back their winnings. When they went up to the suite, they were awestruck by a room that surpassed their wildest dreams, an extravagant 5-star suite with their winnings in tow. From that moment on, they knew their lives were about to change drastically. During that first trip, they managed to win over $100,000 in just one weekend. As their operation began to grow, weekdays were dedicated to studying, but every weekend the team would catch the first flight to Vegas and repeat the process. The students playing the roles of spotters would spread out at the tables, placing small bets to initiate the card counting while the gorillas waited for signals from a distance. Despite their caution and clever methods, security always kept an eye on big winners. When the same faces appeared week after week, it naturally raised suspicions. Therefore, the team never focused on just one casino. They diversified their approach. Every weekend, they would fly to Las Vegas, gamble on Saturday and Sunday, and then enjoy the nightlife before returning to their lives as regular MIT students. Mr. M and the founding partners, Bill and John, were meticulous about their accounting. Every team member submitted a detailed report of their weekly earnings and losses. Based on these reports, profits were distributed accordingly. The profit distribution was straightforward. The largest share, 45%, went to management, Mr. M and his partners. Investors also received 45%, while the remaining 10% went to the players. Players received a modest basic salary, and those who made profits got their share of the earnings. If a player lost money, they only received their basic salary. This system ensured precise weekly profit distribution, allowing the operation to run smoothly for several months. To avoid drawing attention, the team constantly varied their targets, expanding beyond Las Vegas to hit casinos in other American cities and even traveling to Europe. This diversity was all part of Mr. M's strategic planning. Even though some team members occasionally faced significant losses, the overall outcome was usually profitable according to the law of large numbers. While there might be losing weeks, they were often balanced by winning ones. Sean was the standout player of the team, consistently achieving remarkable profits. In one instance, he won $75,000 in a single round. not a game, but a single round. His performance was always outstanding, and his higher bets compared to his teammates were backed by unwavering confidence. Within 6 months, the team's net profits neared $1 million, while the students didn't earn as much as management or the investors. They enjoyed a lifestyle they had never dreamed of, especially at such a young age. They lived in luxury, moving between lavish hotels, fine dining restaurants, first-class flights, and attending major parties and shows in Las Vegas. High rollers were treated like royalty, and the casinos catered to them in hopes that they would continue to gamble. Typically, the casinos would end up winning, but with the MIT Blackjack Team, the dynamic was different. The students consistently held the upper hand, taking money from the casinos through blackjack while also enjoying complimentary rooms, meals, parties, and shows. One team member even managed to convince a hotel casino to sponsor his wedding at the prestigious Palace, one of Las Vegas's most luxurious hotels. While living this high life, Mr. M and his partners continued training new groups of students. They were not satisfied with just the current team. They wanted to expand their operation continuously. The number of team members grew from 20 to 30, and at its peak, the team boasted around 40 members. Mr. M and his partners treated the operation like a real business, always looking for ways to expand. However, internal conflicts sometimes arose, particularly among students dissatisfied with the profit distribution. As we mentioned, students only received 10% of the profits, despite doing most of the work. Some demanded a higher percentage, but Mr. M and the founding partners stood firm. Those unhappy with the arrangement were free to leave and even start their own teams if they wanted. Key players like Sean, Dan, and Katie were making good money because they earned substantial profits. Each student received 10% of the profits they generated, so earnings were directly proportional to their performance. The team operated with high efficiency, and overall profits exceeded $1 million, worth significantly more back then, equivalent to around $2.5 million today. Importantly, they were operating within the law. Even if caught, they wouldn't face imprisonment. The worst consequence would be getting banned from a casino. Despite their efforts to diversify and rotate between different casinos, security teams and surveillance in these establishments were extremely sophisticated. The gambling industry is highly lucrative, and casinos invest heavily to protect their profits. Independent investigators moved from casino to casino, monitoring suspicious players, particularly those with consistent big wins. These investigators compiled detailed information on these players and shared it across various casinos. The team soon noticed a particular individual following them, a man with gray hair who appeared repeatedly at different casinos. Initially, they assumed he was just another security manager or regular monitor, but when they saw him in multiple locations, they realized he was more than that. This man was Andy Anderson, a private investigator specializing in casino security, working for an independent company called Griffin, which provided security services to various casinos. Imagine the scale of this industry. Entire companies were dedicated solely to security services. Griffin's job was to provide lists of names and photos of individuals posing a threat to casino business. Investigators like Andy Anderson were tasked with identifying cheats and those attempting to outsmart the casinos. Andy was the first to notice the blackjack team's movements and began tracking them from casino to casino, analyzing their behavior to understand their operations. Initially, he couldn't link them all together due to their large numbers, but began taking photos and identifying connections. Each time he identified a new member, he added them to his list. From the start, it was clear they weren't cheating in the conventional sense, which indicated they were likely using card-counting techniques. For over 2 months, he monitored them, reviewing security camera footage to grasp their operation. It didn't take long before he figured it all out. He understood the roles of the spotters and guerrillas and how they signaled each other. Once he connected the dots and understood their method, he began directing casino security to stop anyone they recognized from the student team. Security would intercept them in the middle of a game. Sean's persona as the Russian arms dealer was blown when security confronted him. He tried to explain that he wasn't doing anything wrong. When they insisted he leave, he said he'd take his money and go, but they wouldn't let him. Even though casinos had become legitimate businesses, they hadn't entirely shed their mob-like tactics. They took Sean to one of the back rooms and threatened him, telling him that what he was doing was considered cheating, even if it wasn't technically illegal. They warned him he was permanently banned from the casino, and that if he tried to return, they'd call the police and have him arrested for trespassing. That was all they could legally do, ban him from the casino. Moreover, they were obligated to exchange his chips for cash because, in the end, he hadn't broken any laws. However, catching one member suggested that their entire operation could be compromised. This suspicion was confirmed when, a few days later, Dan was also caught. Like Sean, Dan was a guerrilla and one of the top winners. He was intercepted by security at a different casino. It became clear that their activities were becoming widely known. In one instance, when they traveled to Monte Carlo in Europe, they were even detained and threatened with arrest, being told that card counting was illegal there. This was, of course, nonsense. Card counting is impossible to prove. It's simply math done in the mind. It was evident that the net was closing in on them. Their notoriety had spread to European casinos, and they had to expect to be caught wherever they went. The reason behind this widespread knowledge was Griffin Investigations, the security company we mentioned earlier. Griffin specialized in casino security and maintained an updated book known as the Griffin Book. This book was a comprehensive list of names, photos, and details of individuals considered threats to casino operations, cheaters and fraudsters. Most of the student team members had been added to this book, complete with their names, photos, and the aliases they used. None of the students ever used their real names. They always adopted personas, like Sean's Russian arms dealer character. The Griffin Book was distributed to casinos. Worldwide, any casino that subscribed to Griffin services received the Griffin Book and regular updates via fax about suspicious players. If a player was spotted in one casino, warnings were sent to all neighboring casinos. It became clear that Griffin Investigations was systematically closing in on the Blackjack Team. The warnings included the person's photo, name, and description. Andy, the investigator who exposed the student team, wasn't content with merely alerting the casinos. He wanted to uncover their secrets, where they came from, and how they executed their operations with such intelligence and precision. The casinos had the students' addresses because some, lacking caution, used their real addresses to receive free casino offers. Andy noticed that almost all of their addresses were in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the city where MIT is located. He quickly deduced that they were university students. Andy then obtained the university's yearbook, which contained photos and names of all the students. By comparing the yearbook photos with the ones he had, he identified their real names, which were subsequently added to the Griffin Book. The student team and their leader, Mr. M., soon realized they were being consistently stopped and banned from casinos, recognizing that they had been identified. Some members attempted to disguise themselves. For instance, Simon tried to play the role of a wheelchair-bound person, while another member, John, even disguised himself as a woman, complete with a wig and makeup. Others tried growing beards or mustaches and wore different outfits to vary their appearances. However, most of these disguises were quickly uncovered. especially since casinos employed facial recognition software that could identify individuals as soon as they entered. Even in 1993, casinos were equipped with such advanced security technology, making them some of the most security-savvy institutions. Unfortunately, things went from bad to worse. The team began to suffer from an unusual streak of bad luck. While there could be periods of losses lasting over a week, these were typically balanced out over time. However, their losses suddenly began to pile up, especially since experienced students like Sean, Dan, and Katie could no longer play freely. Almost all casinos would immediately throw them out, leaving the newer recruits, whom Mr. M had recently trained, to do most of the playing. It seemed that these new students weren't up to par, leading to significant losses that amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars, nearly $500,000 in losses over just 3 months. Problems mounted from all sides: casino security, bad luck, and increasing tensions between management and the students. The students, unable to win, were no longer making any money. The entire situation became one of continuous losses, and even when they won a little, their share was so insignificant that it created resentment among the students. This discontent likely contributed to their losses. Eventually, many students left the team. Mr. M and the management were under immense stress, especially Mr. M, who was known to crumble under pressure. One day, he forgot a bag containing $150,000 of the company's money in a classroom. He went home, slept, and only remembered the bag in the middle of the night. When he returned to the university to search for it, he found that a janitor had turned it over to the guards, who then handed it to the police. A federal investigation was launched to determine the money's origin and ensure it wasn't involved in money laundering or any illegal activity. It took a long time, but eventually, Mr. M and his company recovered the money. This incident caused many team members to lose respect for Mr. M. Despite his intelligence and typically brilliant planning, it was clear he had crumbled under pressure and continuous losses. It became evident he wouldn't find a solution to their current predicament. The situation deteriorated to the point where Mr. M's partners, Bill and John, held a private meeting to discuss the possibility of ousting Mr. M from the company and the team he had founded, proposing to replace him with Sean. However, when they presented the idea to Sean, he refused immediately. First, it would be a betrayal of Mr. M, whom Sean still regarded as his mentor and to whom he felt a great debt of gratitude. Second, the other team members already resented the management due to the perceived unfair profit distribution. If Sean accepted, the team would likely turn against him as well. It was clear to Sean that taking over a sinking ship wouldn't end well. The logical choice was for him to start a new team under a new company. However, out of respect for Mr. M, he decided not to do that until the company collapsed or ceased operations. Indeed, it wasn't long before Mr. M informed his partners that he had decided to step down from the company, as he could no longer manage it. Following Mr. M's departure, his partners also left, leading to the official dissolution of the company. This happened towards the end of 1993, meaning the company had operated for about 1.5 years. Sean then decided to form his own team, establishing a new company with his old teammates Dan and Katie. They learned from the mistakes of Mr. M and his partners, particularly the unfair profit distribution. Sean and his partners believed that the main reason for their continuous losses was that the students felt they weren't getting their fair share, which affected their focus and performance. Correcting this mistake became their top priority. They retained the positive aspects learned from Mr. M, such as creating a structured and professional organization with proper management and rigorous training. Everything was documented and legal, but this time the investors were the students themselves. Each member contributed what they could, and their share of the profits was proportional to their investment. No matter how small, They could start with a little and grow together. The key was ensuring everyone felt the arrangement was fair. This was the true path to lasting success. Sustainability was more important than quick profits. These principles became the foundation upon which Sean's team was founded, ultimately becoming the most successful blackjack team in history. Over the next 4 to 5 years, Sean's team grew and expanded, eventually comprising more than 60 players. During this time, they accumulated total profits exceeding $5 million, making them the most successful blackjack team ever. Although other teams emerged, even from other universities, none reached their level of success. Sean and his teammates always credited much of their achievement to Mr. M. He laid the foundations, charted the course, and was the mastermind behind their multi-million-dollar winnings. After these adventures, most of the students went on to work for tech companies or high-level educational institutions. Some founded tech companies and sold them for millions. Sean himself founded several tech companies, sold them, and became an incredibly wealthy millionaire, along with most of his team members, who found great success in their lives. And so we reach the end of our story. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe our channel.